Boy smiles in 1905. Photo. When experts zoom into his eyes, they discover a horrifying truth. Sarah Mitchell's fingers trembled as she held the magnifying glass over the sepia photograph. The antique shop in downtown Portland, Oregon, had been her grandmother's pride for 40 years. But this particular image had arrived in a dusty estate box just 3 days ago. The photograph showed a young boy, perhaps 8 years old, standing in what appeared to be a Victorian parlor in 1905. His bright smile radiated pure joy, captured forever in that moment of childhood innocence. But something was wrong. Sarah's breath caught as she focused the magnifying glass on the boy's face. At first glance, the child appeared happy. His mouth was curved into what seemed like a joyful smile, but something felt wrong about the expression. The smile looked stiff, unnatural, almost painted on. As Sarah adjusted the focus and examined the boy's eyes more closely, her heart began to race. "That's impossible," Sarah whispered, her hands trembling. The boy's eyes told a completely different story from his forced smile. Behind the artificial happiness, his eyes were wide with unmistakable terror. There was a pleading quality in his gaze, as if he were silently begging for help. The contrast between his manufactured smile and his frightened eyes created a chilling contradiction that defied normal childhood photography. Sarah had spent 15 years appraising antique photographs, but she'd never encountered anything like this. The image quality was exceptional for 1905, suggesting it had been taken by a skilled photographer with expensive equipment. The backing bore the embossed mark of Whitmore Photography Studio, Boston, Massachusetts. As afternoon sunlight streamed through her shop window, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She needed to understand this photograph's secret. The boy's terrified eyes seemed to be calling out across more than a century, his forced smile unable to hide the fear that had been captured forever in that haunting moment. Sarah's investigation started with the Whitmore Photography Studio mark. A quick search through photography archives revealed that Edmund Whitmore had been one of Boston's most respected portrait photographers from 1895 to 1912. His studio, located on Beacon Hill, had served wealthy families throughout New England. But by 1913, all records of Whitmore had mysteriously vanished from public documents. The estate sale paperwork provided their first real clue. The photograph had belonged to Margaret Thornfield, a 93-year-old woman who had passed away in a nursing home outside Boston. Margaret's niece, Jennifer Walsh, had sold off her aunt's belongings without examining them closely. When Sarah called Jennifer, she learned something intriguing. "Aunt Margaret never talked about her childhood," Jennifer explained over the phone. "She was always secretive about her family history. Whenever we asked about old photographs or relatives, she'd change the subject immediately. She had this whole trunk of old pictures that she kept locked in her bedroom, but she made me promise never to look through them after she died." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "Did you notice anything unusual about the photographs when you packed them for the estate sale?" "Not really. They were just old family pictures, I thought. But now that you mention it, there was something strange. Aunt Margaret always kept one photograph on her nightstand face down. She said it was too painful to look at, but she couldn't bear to throw it away either. I wonder if that's the one you found." The conversation revealed another crucial detail. Margaret Thornfield's maiden name had been Brennan, and her family had lived in Boston's South End in the early 1900s. Sarah now had a surname and a neighborhood to research. The mystery was deepening, but she finally had a direction to follow. That evening, Sarah contacted the Boston Public Library's Archives Department, requesting any records related to the Brennan family from 1905. The Boston Public Library's response arrived within 48 hours, and it contained information that made Sarah's hands shake as she read. The Brennan family had indeed lived at 247 Warren Avenue in Boston's South End in 1905. The household consisted of Thomas Brennan, a successful textile merchant, his wife Catherine, and their 3 children, Margaret, age 12, Patrick, age 8, and baby Rose, just 2 years old. But the records also contained a tragedy that had shocked the neighborhood. On October 15, 1905, 8-year-old Patrick Brennan had disappeared without a trace. According to newspaper accounts, he had been playing in the family's backyard after school when he simply vanished. The police investigation lasted for months, but no evidence was ever found. The case remained one of Boston's most mysterious unsolved disappearances. Sarah studied the photograph again with this new knowledge. The smiling boy matched Patrick's age and the time frame perfectly. But now, Examining his eyes with the magnifying glass, she could see the fear that the forced smile had tried to conceal. Why would someone have made him smile like that? And why had his sister Margaret kept this photograph hidden for nearly 9 decades? A call to the Boston Police Department's Historical Records Division provided another piece of the puzzle. Detective Robert Hayes, who specialized in cold cases, agreed to search their archives. The Brennan case was unusual, he told Sarah. Usually when a child disappears, there are witnesses or some kind of evidence, but Patrick Brennan seemed to have simply vanished into thin air. The family was devastated, especially the older sister, Margaret. According to the reports, she blamed herself because she was supposed to be watching him that afternoon. Sarah realized she was looking at more than just a mysterious photograph. This image might be the last known picture of Patrick Brennan, taken just days or weeks before his disappearance. But the terrified expression in the reflection suggested something far more sinister than a simple family portrait session. The question that haunted Sarah's thoughts was becoming clearer. What had Patrick Brennan been afraid of? And why had someone forced him to smile for this photograph? Edmund Whitmore's photography studio had been more than just a business. It had been a carefully constructed facade. Sarah's deeper investigation into Boston City records revealed disturbing patterns that had been overlooked in 1905. Between 1900 and 1910, at least 6 children who had posed for portraits at Whitmore's studio had either disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances shortly after their photography sessions. The connection hadn't been noticed at the time because the incidents occurred across different neighborhoods and social classes. Wealthy families from Beacon Hill, middle-class merchants from the South End, and even some working-class families from the North End had all brought their children to Whitmore's renowned studio. His reputation for capturing the soul of childhood had made him the most sought-after children's photographer in Boston. Dr. Emily Harrison, a professor of photography history at Boston University, provided crucial insight when Sarah contacted her. Victorian photography required long exposure times, Dr. Harrison explained. Children had to remain perfectly still for several minutes. Photographers used various techniques to keep them calm and motionless. Some were harmless, toys, games, stories, but others. She paused. There were documented cases of photographers using laudanum or other drugs to sedate restless children. This revelation sent chills down Sarah's spine. If Whitmore had been drugging children for his portraits, it might explain Patrick's fearful reflection. Perhaps the boy had sensed something wrong during the photography session, something that his conscious smile couldn't reveal, but his reflection somehow captured. The more Sarah researched, the more sinister the picture became. Whitmore's studio had been located in a large townhouse with a basement that he claimed to use for developing photographs. But according to building records, the basement had been unusually large and had featured several locked rooms that no one else had ever seen. Sarah was beginning to suspect that Patrick Brennan's photograph wasn't just the last image of a missing child. It might be evidence of something far worse. Finding Margaret Thornfield's childhood address led Sarah to an unexpected discovery. The house at 247 Warren Avenue was still standing, now converted into condominiums. The current owner, James Murphy, had lived there for 20 years and had always been curious about the home's history. When Sarah explained her investigation, James invited her to examine the property. The previous owner mentioned something strange, James said as he led Sarah through the restored Victorian interior. There used to be a hidden compartment behind the fireplace in what's now my home office. When I renovated, I found some old papers stuffed inside. I kept them in case they were important to someone. The papers James retrieved were a revelation. Among them were letters written by a 12-year-old Margaret Brennan to her diary, dated just weeks after Patrick's disappearance. The child's handwriting revealed a secret she had carried for nearly 90 years. "Dear Diary," one entry began, "I know what happened to Patrick, but Mama says I must never tell anyone. Mr. Whitmore came to our house the day after the photograph session. He told Mama and Papa that Patrick had seen something he shouldn't have in the studio. He said Patrick was asking questions about the locked rooms in the basement. Mr. Whitmore promised Mama that he would take care of the situation and that our family would never be bothered by questions again." Another entry, dated a week later, was even more damning. "Patrick told me he was scared when Mr. Whitmore took his picture. He said the photographer kept looking at him strangely and asking if he wanted to see the special room downstairs. Patrick said no, but Mr. Whitmore insisted that all the brave boys got to see it. The reflection in the window shows how Patrick really felt. He was trying to be brave for Mama and Papa, but inside he was terrified." Sarah realized that Margaret had lived her entire life knowing that her brother had been taken by Edmund Whitmore, but had been too frightened or pressured to ever reveal the truth. The photograph had been both evidence and burden, proof of Patrick's final moments of innocence before he encountered true evil. Armed with Margaret's hidden letters, Sarah contacted Detective Hayes again. The Boston Police Department's cold case unit agreed to reopen the Patrick Brennan investigation based on the new evidence. What they discovered in the city archives was shocking. Edmund Whitmore had been investigated multiple times between 1905 and 1912, but each investigation had been mysteriously dropped without explanation. Detective Hayes uncovered records showing that Whitmore had connections to several prominent Boston families and city officials. His photography studio had been more than a business. It had been a cover for activities that the police reports only hinted at with coded language. References to special sessions and private arrangements appeared throughout the documents. The breakthrough came when Hayes found the original police report filed by Thomas Brennan immediately after Patrick's disappearance. The report, buried in the archives for over a century, contained details that had never been made public. Thomas Brennan had told police that Patrick had returned from his photography session, changed and frightened. The boy had nightmares for 3 consecutive nights, crying about the man in the dark room who wanted to show him pictures. On the morning of October 15, 1905, Patrick had confided to his sister Margaret that he was planning to tell their parents about what he had seen in Whitmore's basement. That afternoon, he disappeared. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Further investigation revealed that Whitmore's studio had abruptly closed in November 1905, just 1 month after Patrick's disappearance. The photographer had claimed he was moving to California, but no records of his arrival on the West Coast were ever found. His Beacon Hill townhouse had been sold quickly to a buyer who immediately demolished the basement and filled it with concrete. Sarah realized they were dealing with more than just a single child's disappearance. Edmund Whitmore appeared to have been operating a network that preyed on children, using his prestigious photography business as a front to gain access to vulnerable victims from Boston's most respectable families. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Detective Hayes contacted retired FBI Special Agent Maria Santos, who had spent decades investigating historical cases involving crimes against children. Santos immediately recognized patterns in the Whitmore case that connected to a broader network of child exploitation that had operated across multiple East Coast cities in the early 1900s. These networks were more sophisticated than people realized, Santos explained to Sarah during a meeting at Boston Police Headquarters. They used legitimate businesses, photography studios, children's clothing stores, even orphanages, as fronts. The perpetrators were often well-connected individuals who could protect each other and silence investigations. Santos had spent years documenting what she called the Portrait Network, a group of photographers and businessmen who had operated from 1890 to 1915 across Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. Edmund Whitmore's name appeared on a list of suspected participants that the FBI had compiled in the 1970s. But without living witnesses or concrete evidence, no prosecutions had ever moved forward. The evidence Sarah had discovered, Margaret's letters and the photograph showing Patrick's fear, provided the first direct testimony linking a specific child to the network. Santos explained that the reflection phenomenon could be explained by the photographic techniques of the era. If Patrick had been drugged or hypnotized during the session, his conscious expression might have been artificially induced while his reflection captured his true emotional state. Children's minds sometimes resist psychological manipulation in ways that adults don't, Santos explained. If Patrick was under some form of influence when the photograph was taken, his reflection might have shown his genuine psychological state, while his direct image showed what the photographer wanted to capture. The revelation that Patrick Brennan's case was connected to a larger criminal network added urgency to the investigation. Santos suggested that other families might have photographs with similar anomalies, evidence that had been hiding in plain sight for over a century, waiting for someone to notice the contradictions between reflection and reality. Sarah's discovery began attracting national attention when Detective Hayes announced that the Boston Police Department was formally reopening multiple cold cases from the early 1900s. The story of Patrick Brennan's photograph appeared on television news programs and genealogy websites, prompting responses from families across New England who had similar, mysterious portraits from the same era. Within 2 weeks, Sarah received calls from descendants of 7 families who had children photographed by Edmund Whitmore or Associated Studios between 1900 and 1912. Each family had stories that had been whispered among relatives but never reported to authorities. Children who had returned from photography sessions traumatized and afraid, youngsters who had spoken of secret rooms and special pictures, kids who had disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances shortly after their portraits were taken. The most compelling response came from David Chen, whose great-grandfather had been a Chinese immigrant working as a servant in a Beacon Hill mansion in 1906. According to family oral history, his great-grandfather had witnessed Edmund Whitmore bringing children to a basement entrance behind his studio late at night. The man had been too afraid to report what he saw, knowing that as an immigrant with limited English, his testimony would not be believed or might even result in his deportation. But David Chen's family had preserved something remarkable, a detailed journal his great-grandfather had kept, written in Chinese characters, documenting everything he had witnessed. When translated by a historian at Harvard University, the journal provided the most complete account of Whitmore's activities that had ever been found. The journal described a network of wealthy men who paid Whitmore substantial sums for access to children under the guise of artistic photography sessions. It detailed the layout of the studio's basement, including rooms that were soundproofed and equipped with cameras and developing equipment for purposes that went far beyond legitimate portrait photography. Most importantly, the journal contained a list of names, children who had been brought to the studio and never seen again. Patrick Brennan's name was among them, confirming that his disappearance had not been random, but part of a systematic pattern of exploitation and murder. The evidence accumulated through Sarah's investigation prompted Massachusetts Attorney General Rebecca Martinez to announce the formation of a special historical crimes unit dedicated to investigating cases from the early 20th century. While Edmund Whitmore and his associates were long dead, the state committed to providing closure to families and officially acknowledging the crimes that had been covered up for over a century. The announcement triggered an emotional response from Margaret Thornfield's surviving relatives. Jennifer Walsh contacted Sarah to share additional family documents that Margaret had kept hidden, including a letter her brother Patrick had written to her the night before he disappeared. In childish handwriting, Patrick had described his fear of the photographer and his determination to tell their parents what he had witnessed in the basement. "He was just 8 years old, but he was trying to protect other children," Jennifer said through tears during a phone call with Sarah. "My Aunt Margaret carried the guilt of his disappearance her entire life, but she also carried his courage. She kept that photograph as evidence, even though it was too painful to look at." The investigation revealed that at least 12 children had disappeared or died after visiting Whitmore's studio, making it one of the most extensive child exploitation cases in Boston's history. DNA evidence from artifacts found in the demolished basement area, recovered during a formal excavation, confirmed that multiple children had been held there against their will. Dr. Patricia Williams, a forensic psychologist who consulted on the case, explained to Sarah how the photograph had captured something that traditional investigation methods had missed. Children's psychological responses to trauma can manifest in ways that adults don't immediately recognize. Patrick's reflection showed his authentic emotional state, while his smile showed his attempt to comply with adult expectations. In a sense, that photograph was his testimony, preserved for over a century until someone was finally ready to listen. The case prompted changes in how historical crimes against children are investigated, with particular attention paid to seemingly innocent artifacts that might contain hidden evidence of trauma or abuse. 6 months after Sarah's discovery, the city of Boston unveiled a memorial garden dedicated to Patrick Brennan and the other children who had been victims of Edmund Whitmore's network. Located in the South End, near where Patrick had lived, the garden featured 12 small bronze plaques bearing the names and faces of the children whose cases had been verified through the investigation. Sarah stood in the garden during the dedication ceremony, holding the original photograph that had started everything. The image looked different to her now, not mysterious or frightening, but profoundly sad and ultimately heroic. Patrick Brennan's reflection had indeed been trying to tell a story, and after 118 years, someone had finally listened. Margaret Thornfield's family attended the ceremony, bringing closure to a secret that had haunted them for generations. Jennifer Walsh spoke about her aunt's lifelong burden and her courage in preserving evidence even when she couldn't find her voice to speak about it. Margaret always said that someday the truth would come out, Jennifer told the gathered crowd. She believed that Patrick was still trying to protect other children, even from beyond the grave. This photograph was his final gift to his sister and to all of us. Proof that truth has a way of surviving even when it's buried for more than a century. The photograph now resides in the Boston Police Department's museum, displayed alongside the other evidence that helped solve one of the city's oldest cold cases. Visitors often comment on the haunting contradiction between Patrick's smile and his reflection, but they also notice something else. The determination in the boy's eyes, visible in both images, a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, the truth has a way of finding its voice. Sarah returned to her antique shop with a deeper appreciation for the stories that old photographs can tell. She now examines each image not just for its monetary value, but for the human truths it might contain, knowing that somewhere in those faces from the past, other voices might still be waiting to be heard.